We're starting out with a simple drawing and our basic armature, which is just our styrofoam egg. You might have a few eggs attached to each other, some wire, some legs coming out as wooden dowels, but this is just our simple one. In order to put your clay over top of the armature, you have to roll it out thin. So I've used 2 pencils as my guide and a rolling pin to roll it out nice and thin. Then to start with my armature, with my styrofoam egg, I need to take that and put some glue, a bit of glue and water. Doesn't have to be thick glue, but glue and water. And I'm painting all over the egg. Then my egg is ready to have that clay all applied to it. It's the same no matter what kind of armature you're using. Okay, so you can see I've got my styrofoam ball here that's going to be the body of this bird. I'm just painting it right now with just a weak solution of glue and water. It's just a little bit of glue, a little bit of water. My clay that I had there, I used 2 pencils to mark how thick I wanted it, so I had an even thickness, and I just used a rolling pin to roll it out with the 2 pencils on either side. Then I had it a nice even thickness. Probably could have been a little thinner, maybe not. Anyway, so then I took the clay after I put the glue and water around my styrofoam ball, and I'm just working that clay, pressing it gently with my fingers all around that clay, sorry, not the clay, the little Easter egg thing there, the styrofoam ball that I have. Once I've got it all pinched together and all of the clay is pinched and I can't see any more of the styrofoam ball showing through, then I'm going to work on smoothing this clay. So this is going to be the body of the bird. And I'm going to smooth the clay by working it with my hands. I'm going to roll it on the table, but a little bit of water goes a long way. Whenever I'm working with this air dry clay, I always have a little cup of water there, and I like to dip my fingers in the water and then go back and work with the clay. And you can see that my hands are a little bit wet. You can use too much water and then your clay is just going to kind of turn to a little mud slop. But I put a little bit of water on my fingers, work it over the clay, and then use my thumb to smooth out everywhere that there's some cracks and divots. You want to get this as smooth as possible. Once it's dry, you can do some more sanding to it and that sort of thing, so that'll be just fine. But in the meantime, try to get it as smooth as you can now so that when it is all dry, you'll have very little sanding to do. I don't want to see any big cracks in your bird or in your sculpture when you're done. If you do have big cracks, I can show you how to get rid of that too. I'll show you how to get rid of that just by taking a little bit of the clay, mixing it with a little bit of water. You kind of create a bit of a clay paste and you work it in through the cracks, and then you can get a smooth surface. So if you do accidentally get cracks on your sculpture, you can get rid of them. Don't leave those cracks in there. You have a higher level of skill than that. I want to see you working this clay around your base so that this will work, and you'll have a nice smooth finish to your sculpture when you're finished. So just take your time with the finishing touches with the body, making it as smooth as you can. You can see on mine here, there's still a few little, bumps and divots. It's not perfectly smooth, and that's okay. We'll sand some of this out once it dries, and if there's any cracks or anything in it, we can fill those with a little bit of clay and water, add a little bit of slip and fill them in. But in the meantime, just try to get your body as smooth as you can. In this video here, I'm just doing the same thing with the clay on the round ball, and I'm just working through. I've just got a little more better of a close-up shot of me working with my thumb there, trying to get the clay a little bit smoother in there. I've got quite a large chunk in there, and when you're going in there, if there's those cracks, just wet your fingers a little bit, wet the clay, and then work over that with your thumb, and it should smooth it all out. Now, if you find you have a little extra clay, like you can see I do up on that ridge in there, you can just go in and pinch that clay right off. And as long as you've attached, all the other clay is still attached and there's no styrofoam ball going through, then that's just fine. So here I've got this ridge, so I've just pulled off and pinched off that extra bit of clay that I don't need. And then I keep working it and smoothing it with my thumb. And there's a little bit more of a ridge yet around that ball yet, and I'll keep working with this till it's smooth and pinching off any of that extra clay that I don't need. Now, what can also happen is underneath your clay, you can get air bubbles underneath in there. And so if you're getting some air bubbles underneath there, all you need to do is take a toothpick and poke where the air bubble is. And then you can either, it will just push out the air, you can push out the air, or when you push out the air, then you can pinch a little bit off too. So there's a bit of an air bubble there you can see as the clay is working back and forth. Just taking a toothpick, putting a hole in there, and then I'm pushing out the air. And then if there gets to be a little bit of extra clay, I just pull that clay right off. And the same thing, um, if my thumb is a little bit wet, and then I just start working that with my thumb and smoothing that all out there. If you have an armature that looks more like this, then you're going to have to do the round body of it first and then go back up and attach the legs. So you can see here my two legs are there and I've got them off of the armature for now, but here's the styrofoam ball that's covered uh, in the clay, and so I'm just going to attach the two legs on there, and then I'm going to have to make sure that I've got it balanced a little bit as well. So you're going to have to make sure you're balancing this, which is nice when you have those wire legs that are there, because you can just bend those, and they end up being quite sturdy. The styrofoam ball and the little amount of clay usually aren't that heavy, but the bendable legs will be quite good in making this sturdy. And then you'll have to attach the head on afterwards. You're gonna have to make sure before that clay is dry that you have put in, your toothpick or your wooden dowel, or maybe you have wire, maybe your neck is going to be a little bit of a curved neck, but put that in while the clay is still wet. So here I've gone and I've made the head of the bird just with a smaller styrofoam ball. You can use tin foil or a ball of tape, it doesn't matter, but it's covered in the air dry clay. It was all smooth, and then I've got to put the head on there, and then again you're going to have to rebalance as you go. You're going to have to rebalance those legs and make sure that your bird stands up. Once the clay dries, then we'll start adding on the beak and a little bit more clay around the legs to make them more sturdy, but we'll just let this part of the armature dry first. When you're going to add something small, it's not very thick, maybe similar to like this little wing that I'm going to be adding on, you can score the back side of it so that you're roughing up the clay a little bit. Just go in with something sharp. I'm just using a paper clip here and rough up the back, and then you can put, I've got a little bit of glue and water here, but a little bit of slip, like a little bit of clay and water mixed together, will work well too. And you're also going to want to put that little bit of slip or that little bit of glue and water on the armature as well, and then you can kind of twist and pinch that together. This isn't going to work for anything that's really large or heavy. You may end up finding that it falls off, but for something small like this, you can twist it. As long as you've scored it and put some slip on there, it should stick just fine on the side, and then you can go in and smooth it out and just sort of push and twist that on there. Another good little tip is you can just take one of those cheap paint brushes, and you can just put a little bit of water on it, and it will help to smooth out the edges if you need your edges smooth as well. That paintbrush and a little bit of water will do wonders for creating a smooth surface and filling in any of those little cracks that you need filled in there. So I'm just going to walk you through a few different ways that you can stick things onto your bird. So for example, on this smaller one, how we're attaching the feet or the wings or the beak, depending on what you're attaching to yours. You're going to need, again, that little bit of glue and water. And the glue and water, you can use a cheap paintbrush to apply the glue and water. But the clay on the thing you're attaching is going to have to be wet. Maybe the armature is still wet too, but the attachment's got to be that wet clay. You can't just attach a dry tail to a dry armature. The tail in this case is wet, and so then I'm going in and I've already put glue, a little bit of glue and water down on the armature and on the tail as well. And then I'm going in with my clay tools and I'm smoothing that out so that there's no seam on either one. So I'm going in with my fingers and the clay tool to do that. But before I did that, I did have to brush on a little bit of glue and water, or you can also make what's called a slip, where you just take, a small pea-sized amount of the clay and you mix it with water. And if you just mix it between your fingers, you'll get a little bit of a paste. That's the slip, and that is a fantastic glue as well. And so I've done that on this beak here as well. And as I'm holding it there, then I'm just taking my clay tool and I'm just working that seam through. I'm just gently going through and working that clay back so that there's no seam between the beak and the body of the bird. But again, it's been wet first. This isn't dry on dry. This is a wet beak that I've got on there. The clay is still wet, and I applied some slip to this, a little bit of clay and water, and also probably a little bit of glue and water in there as well to help this all stick. But again, this isn't a dry beak that I'm attaching to a dry body. I am still working with this clay is wet. And so here we are, we're attaching the wing, and you can see I just applied a little bit of glue and water on there, and then just working with those clay tools to smooth that wing onto it. Okay, so for my little bird, I made a little book because we're doing that anthropomorphism. We want our bird to have some human qualities to him. So my bird is going to be reading a book. So I did make a book. So I just want to make sure that I'm checking the book to see how it will hold in the bird's hands. Is my book too big? Is my book too small? How am I going to have to work this out? So I've looked to see how the arms on my bird are posed and how my book will hold there. As I'm comparing it, I think I'm probably just going to have to glue the book on in the end. I thought I was going to be able to do a really big newspaper, but I think with the clay it'll just be too big. So I'm just going to make my book a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to end up gluing it onto the arm in the end. When you're drawing your bird, you're going to have to lay it down, or your sculpture, you're going to have to lay it down on its side. If you have it sitting, if you have the clay base of it sitting right on the ground, so lay it on its side and let it dry, and that way you're not going to have the damp base. Okay, once your entire sculpture is dry and you're looking at it later, you're probably going to notice you might have a few little divots or bumps, or you may even have some cracks. So if you have any cracks that you need to fill in there, or some little divots that you didn't notice before, we're going to take a little bit of the DAS clay, little bit of water, and we're going to create what's called a slip. We're going to create a little bit of glue with that clay and water, and if we just take this and work it into the cracks or the bumps and lumps of the clay, it will fill it right in, and it'll create a nice smooth outer surface. So you're just going to take the clay that's mixed with a fair bit of water, and you're just going to work it into the cracks, or you can, if you use a little bit more clay, you can then work it into fill in some little bumps. The new clay, if it's not dry, the new clay will still stick to the old dry clay. You just have to make sure that you're using a little bit of water and glue, and that you're working the clay into it there. But anyway, if you do that with the slip, that will get rid of any of the cracks or bumps and lumps that you have. And if you just keep doing it, keep working with the clay and adding the clay and the water on there to fill in any of your cracks. Remember, you don't want this outside layer to be all cracked. It's going to make it look like you make that somebody that's not of your skill level did this. You can make a very smooth sculpture with this air dry clay. You just need to work at it. So continue working, filling in any of the cracks or getting any lumps and bumps out, any big lumps and bumps out by working at it with that slip with a little bit of clay in the water. And then once you're happy with it, let it dry again. We can sand off any of the little imperfections. That's not a big deal. It's just the big cracks or a big area that you may have missed that you're going to want to fix at this stage. Once your bird is all dry, or your sculpture is all dry, then you can take sandpaper and you can sand the outside of it to make sure that it's nice and smooth. This is just, you've got a few different types of sandpaper and some rasps in your kit. So this is just a fine grade sandpaper that I'm going over the outside with just to smooth it off. But if you had any larger chunks or anything like that, you could use the larger metal rasps that are in your kit to sand down the outside. So before you move on to painting, make sure you have a really good look at your clay sculpture before you paint, and make sure you're happy with it, and then you can move on into the painting.